Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a bonus episode. We're going to talk about an article today from the Daily Beast, and this article has to do with Luc Brunel and the author of the article, Michael Gross's night out with him, Luc Brunel, and, in Michael Gross's own words, Luc Brunel's terrified models. Luc Brunel is not talked about enough in this case. He is a very important part of this case, a linchpin, a guy who was in a leadership role, a man who is accused of providing young 12-year-old girls for Jeffrey Epstein as a birthday present, a man who is accused of partaking in the sex trafficking, a man who is accused of not only enabling Jeffrey Epstein's behavior, but also being one of the key procurers of it. So this morning, we're going to take a little bit of time so that we can talk about Luc Brunel a little bit and talk about how this man deserves to be in bracelets and underneath the jail right next to Ghislaine Maxwell. This man seems to escape scrutiny in a lot of the stories, but it is very important that everybody in a leadership position, especially within this criminal organization, faces justice. There is no reason why Luc Brunel, who has been under all sorts of clouds of impropriety when it comes to women for decades, there is no way that this guy should still be roaming the streets. How is he not arrested? How is he not brought into custody? And how is he not forced to roll over on the rest of them? All right, this article is from the Daily Beast. The author is Michael Gross, and this article was published originally on August 29th of 2019. The headline, My Night with Epstein Pal Luc Brunel and His Terrified Models. It was 1993 or 1994 when I first encountered Luc Brunel, the controversial French modeling agent at a then-trendy South Beach restaurant called The Strand in Miami. Shocking that he's in South Beach, huh? Who else was living in Florida? Jeffrey Epstein, perhaps? A table near mine, set for 6, expanded to seat 10, then shrank for 8, then enlarged to fit a party of 12, and was finally occupied as I finished my meal by a pack of extremely young women, teenagers really, with the willowy frames and lovely faces of neophyte models, and a smaller number of older men who appeared to be, well, smug probably sums it up best. Of course, these are the kind of people that were always around Luc Brunel and Jeffrey Epstein. I call them fellow travelers. You can't hang out with a guy like Jeffrey Epstein or a guy like Luc Brunel and not know what they're up to. It is an impossibility, in my opinion. And for all of these people to come out and act like they had no idea what sort of monster Luc Brunel is, what sort of monster Jeffrey Epstein is, it defies reality for anyone to use that excuse. And the author here, Michael Gross, pretty much says it right here. A bunch of older men and young teenagers, really, with willowy frames and lovely faces, the girls with pie-in-the-sky dreams, right? Oh, we'll make you a model. Come work for our agency. We'll take care of you. We'll hook you up. We'll make sure you reach the stratosphere. And then, when they're in the clutches of these sick bastards, what happens? They're abused, they're exploited, and then they're discarded. A quarter century later, I was reminded of that dinner when Brunel suddenly riveted the world's attention in the hours immediately before the suicide, allegedly, of the notorious pervert and pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, when it was alleged that the Frenchman had provided underage women to the very disgusting pedophile. Look. And not just provided women, folks. When you follow this case and you know the deal, you also know that Luc Brunel is being credibly accused by Virginia Roberts. And it's obvious for anyone who knows anything about the man that he has done this over and over and over again, used his position within these modeling agencies to take advantage of these young women on a regular basis. And this piece of shit, this scumbag, is still flocking around free, doing whatever the hell he wants. Who knows who he's abusing right now? Shortly after that Miami night, I interviewed Brunel, among many others, for a book on the modeling industry published in 1995 as Model, The Ugly Business of Beautiful Women. I think that headline sums it all up, and I'm definitely going to pick this book up by Michael Gross, Model, The Ugly Business of Beautiful Women, because I think to truly understand what was going on within the ranks of these modeling agencies and how they were exploited by people like Epstein and Luc Brunel, I think it's important to have as much information as possible, right? So I'm going to check out this book by Michael Gross and see if it adds any context to what we're talking about. So, although I neither met nor wrote about Epstein, my phone started ringing following his latest arrest for trafficking underage women, and it hasn't stopped since. As exposés of Brunel pile up like a mound of fetid garbage, notably in England's Guardian, France's Liberation, the Washington Post, and the Daily Beast. And reporters have told me that, apparently, I'm among the very few journalists to have interviewed the then elusive and now impossible to find Brunel. So that's pretty telling right there, right? A guy like Brunel who operates in the shadows, a guy like Brunel who is acting almost as like a consigliere for Jeffrey Epstein. And if you're not familiar with mafia terms, a consigliere is basically an advisor, right, to the Don. And if we're looking at this from a RICO standpoint and painting that picture, then you could easily have Luc Brunel in that position as consigliere, right? So this man certainly never wants to talk to reporters. He knows that he was involved in all sorts of disgusting activity. And this gentleman, Michael Gross, is one of the only reporters who have ever been able to pin this man down and have a conversation with him. So again, that's why this article is a proper addition to the catalog. And also, I just like to bring a little bit more light on to Luc Brunel's name because I don't feel like he's talked about enough. But there's more to this story than the handful of damning quotations the papers have lifted from Model. From and about the man sometimes described as a rabattoir, i.e., one who beats the bushes during a hunt to drive game out into the open. And look, Brunel is a sick bastard, right? But he's cagey, he's crafty, he's been doing this for quite some time, and I'm sure he has a lot of contacts that Jeffrey Epstein left him. Again, this isn't your average guy, your average modeling scout, your average a human trafficker. This is a man with connections. This is a man who has a lot of secrets that he could reveal, and this is a man that should be arrested yesterday. There's the videotape of a 60-minute segment from 1988, long suppressed by legal order, that exposed him as an alleged serial abuser of young women. For instance, interviews with competitors who described him as a serial rapist, and a 28-page transcript of our taped interview in which I asked about the charges that Brunel was way more loco than Parentis with the young women in his charges, as well as his oft-reported fondness for cocaine. And that's another huge part of this situation with the models. These kind of scenes and this sort of social situation is the sort of place where drugs are very prevalent, especially cocaine. And in Miami Beach during the 80s, early 90s, forget it. Everybody was getting gacked. So you think about one of these sort of, situations where you have these aspiring models and these perverted ass gross old dudes who are supposedly model scouts or agents or whatever. And you have a recipe for disaster. Everyone's on blow. Everyone's getting high. And, once you get a taste for that kind of stuff, it's easy to get addicted. So they would use the drugs, I'm sure, to almost control these girls. His assurances of his innocence then were barely credible. but I felt a responsibility to report them alongside the sordid charges against him and some of the more damning passages from our conversation. But I left out what happened that same night as our daytime interview. I don't remember why I was in the nightclub, Les Bon Douche, whatever, that evening. It was 25 years ago after all. But what happened there and afterward is a crystal clear memory, most likely because I planned to include it in a final chapter of Model that was never written because the book was already long and tawdry enough. So, not only did he have an interview with Jean-Luc Brunel during the day, obviously he went out with him at night. And he's going to go into this story here about what occurred while he was out with Jean-Luc Brunel. My plan was to conclude the tomb with a chapter on the youngest models of all, known as test board kids, discovered in malls and at modeling conventions, and then thrown into the deep end of the fashion pool, the studios and clubs of Paris and Milan. There, they would either sink or they would swim. I'd chosen a handful of them at an annual modeling convention in New York, asked them to be my pen pal for a year, and that day at Brunel's agency, Karen met one of them, Robin, I've changed the models' names, a Midwesterner who'd signed with him. She introduced me to her friend who called herself Dakota, and we chatted and went on our separate ways. And how many girls like this are there? Girls that have, a story to tell about people like Jean-Luc Brunel and Jeffrey Epstein, but have never been able to tell their story. Either because they've feared for their lives, they've been intimidated, or they just don't want to relive the pain of what occurred. And it really bothers me to know that somebody like Jean-Luc Brunel has been active since the 80s, folks, and nobody has wrangled this son of a bitch. No parent has punched this man square in the face. I have news for you. If this was one of my kids being abused like this, you wouldn't have to worry about the cops finding you. You wouldn't have to worry about the federales finding you. Because I would find you, and I would exact vigilante-style justice. Because it's obvious that the authorities could care less. They could not care less. But there was Dakota on the restaurant floor above the disco at Les Bains Douches, sitting with Brunel and another group of models and older men at a huge table. And when she waved hello, it was clear she was miserable. She told me she hated the place, and Brunel had forced her to come. "Can you get us out of here?" she whispered, gesturing to another model. "Sure, easy." I took them in a taxi to their model apartment off of Champs-Élysées. Oh, there's that Champs-Élysées again, huh? Isn't that where Ghislaine Maxwell is supposedly hiding out now? A crowded room where dirty clothes covered every inch of the floor, and Dakota told me she'd moved there first after living with Brunel at his far more spacious and glamorous apartment nearby on Avenue Hoche. And this is the same story we saw at the building on East 66th Street. 5, 6, 7, 8 models living in one apartment, squalor, dirty apartments, mattresses on the floor, etc., etc. So what they would do is they'd bring these girls in, and then they'd treat them like they were basically indentured servants. There, she discovered an apparent peephole that looked into the bathroom the models in residence used, inspiring her to flee, albeit not very far. The only part of the story that wasn't normal was that peephole. Models often bunk in their agents' homes. "Want to see it?" Dakota asked. She still had a key. This is creepy, bro. So this Brunel cat had all of these young girls shacked up with him because he's supposedly an agent, a scout, whatever. And while they're using the bathroom, this disgusting old prick is peeping on them through a peephole. Around the corner we went, then up one of those old French cage elevators to a far more lavish flat where, sure enough, there was a hidden hole drilled through a wall and a view of a bathroom. The girls were laughing about their escape when Brunel joined us. Earlier that day, he denied that he still used cocaine. "I had a problem," he said in a staccato burst. "It was not a major. I mean, it was a problem. For 4 or 5 years, I did it as fun, because I never did it in the day, and then I did it as an experiment. Fine, it lasted maybe a bit longer than it should, but it had never been like a problem. It had never been, I was at work at 9 in the morning. But as the notes I took afterwards say, he was uncommonly animated, so I wouldn't have vouched for the truth of that assertion. Typical of drug addicts, right? Yeah, I'm not on drugs anymore. I used to have a problem, but I'm all good now. Meanwhile, he has ski rings around his nostrils. It's snowing out of his nostrils, and the dude is obviously gacked out of his beak. Come on, man. Mean to tell me you weren't on blow anymore? Yeah, okay. And he was with a friend with a case of the sniffles, and the peephole? I want you to look behind all the mirrors, he said. Frankly, I just wanted out of there. So the author here, Michael Gross, was creeped out. He went to this flat, looked through the peephole after the model showed it to him. And then Mr. George Jung Jr. comes out of the bathroom gacked out of his mind, acting like he is not gacked out of his mind. And as far as Michael Gross goes, the author of the story, all he wants to do is beat feet and get out of Dodge at this point. A demand that Dakota return to Les Baines Duchesne's with him made me nervous. Earlier that day, he'd struck me as shrewd, smug, and vaguely sleazy. She told me she had to rebuff his advances. His reappearance added scary to that list. So, it wasn't a request, according to Michael Gross. It was a demand that this model, Dakota, return with him to that club. And when you're in a situation like this model was, you're pretty much beholden to this guy. Not only does he hold your career in the palm of his disgusting hand, your living situation is based on him as well. So what happens is they completely catch you up in their web, and then when you can't go anywhere, they move in for the kill. There was a white Ferrari with a white leather interior sitting outside his building. Dakota sat in front, and when Brunel offered to drop me off en route, I squeezed into the back. Her hand snaked around the seat where Brunel couldn't see it. I grabbed it. She squeezed until we reached the Point des Arts, and I got out of the thrumming car. "Will you be okay?" I whispered to Dakota. Her voice said yes. Her eyes, they weren't so sure. And off they roared into the night. I don't know if I would have been comfortable leaving this young lady like Michael Gross was. Honestly, I shouldn't even say I don't know. I know for a fact that me and this Brunel cat would have probably squared up. I have no tolerance for people like this. Zero tolerance for people like this. And especially after covering this case. You put me in a room with a dude like Jean-Luc Brunel, I'm for sure punching him in the face. Not even a question. After seeing the way he was treating these girls, etc., forget it. There's zero chance. So I don't know how Michael Gross was able to contain himself and not, at the very least, get in this guy's face, because it's obvious what he's up to, the sort of scumbag he is. Sometime later, I got a letter from Dakota. She was still in Paris, and I never learned more of what happened to her. But she reported that Robin had returned to the prairie, suffering from an ulcer. I never heard from her again either. But what young woman, full of dreams, would want to tell the tale of how she failed as a fashion model, even if quitting was one of the smartest choices she ever made? And it's the truth. It's such a sad story for a lot of these girls. So many of these girls that we don't even know their names, these ex-models, these young girls that were brought into the circle. They are used, discarded, and then put into the trash. The whole modeling industry needs a shake-up, folks. It really does. Over the years since, I vaguely kept tabs on the agents who were the protagonists, if not the heroes, of Model. So I heard that Brunel had broken with this and that partner and founded an agency of his own in Miami. And beginning about a decade ago, when I first learned of his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, I certainly wasn't surprised. For his part, Brunel and his lawyers have denied the claims that he recruited underage girls for Epstein and abused them himself. Still, he's disappeared in the wake of Epstein's arrest and suicide. So you know Brunel was engaging in all sorts of disgusting behavior before he even sent these girls to Epstein. So these girls were being victimized multiple times by multiple people on multiple continents, and still nobody has stepped in. Still nobody has brought these people to justice. Now, of course, I feel for the no longer young women who have finally been emboldened to speak out about Brunel, and I wonder, and still worry, about Dakota. It's a pretty harrowing tale, folks, and it just gives you another look into Jean-Luc Brunel, his psyche, and how he has been at this for decades. And once again, it is all about context, it's all about meat on the bone, and for anyone who is just getting involved in this case, Jean-Luc Brunel is a name that you should definitely look into. Jean-Luc Brunel is a key player in this, and he does not get enough press. We're going to change that here on the podcast, though. We're going to make sure that we mention this man more often, because it's very important that Jean-Luc Brunel, along with Ghislaine Maxwell and the rest of the co-conspirators, get fitted for a pair of bracelets and a 6x10 cell. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right. Also, if you would like to read the article, you can find the link for the article in the description box, along with the link to the GoFundMe account if you would like to help the podcast out. All right, folks, I will be back later on tonight with the Daily Drop, and we'll do it all over again.